everybody, and welcome to another edition of This Week in Innovation. Today, Brian and I are going to talk about the attention economy. Brian, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Jeff. How are you, Jeff?
Doing well. They're putting in fiber in the neighborhood, so if you hear a jackhammer, let me know. I'll go to mute, but that's exciting times for us. So hopefully I will have a super fast internet connection maybe in a couple of months or so.
That is awesome.
Yep.
That is awesome. I do have fiber. I ran fiber all the way because of a lot of the meetings that I do and some of the demos that I do sometimes is very bandwidth consuming. So yeah, I did it like a few months ago and it's really good. Yeah, ever since then I get pretty good connectivity.
Fantastic. Brian, today you want to talk about the attention economy. What does that mean?
So basically, the idea about the attention economy is it's almost thinking about a consumer or a user's attention, the time that he or she spends, say, watching TV or interacting with the product or spending time on the internet. Looking at that whole concept as the human attention is a scarce commodity, right? And there is so much of it that any human or any person has in a given day, right? You only have 24 hours and you probably spend 18, 20 hours being awake, right? Or maybe 16 hours, depending on how old you are and how young you are. So the question is, the point is that it's a scarce commodity. And within this scarce commodity, how well can brands, how well can websites, how well can products grab the attention of any human, right? Any user, any consumer. That's why this is interesting. So we are applying the traditional economic theories that we apply to finance or any other scarce commodity. And you apply that theory to attention, to the human attention. And that is what the attention economy is. So you've taken something that's very much an art or like something that evolved over a time, and you've attached and applied scientific principle to it, and you treat it like a scarce commodity and value it.
Okay, so makes sense. When I started my career, there was cable and barely cable, and there was a few channels. There was radio, and that was it. And now I've got 2+ million podcasts I can dig through, 600 channels, almost unlimited streaming services. So that time that I spend as a consumer becomes incredibly valuable where I put it, and it's a precious resource to all these various objects, interactions, things that are looking for my time. What do you do with that then?
I think it's a great question, I think, Jeff. I think it's all about understanding where users are spending time and how it is broken down between the different avenues, the different channels, the different types of activities. And then the brands, as well as these content providers or even retailers, can figure out methodologies to create value, because essentially a user's attention is not free. How do you create value within that time so that it becomes a transaction both parties benefit?
Okay. So if you're a retailer, what do you do? What do you do with a busy mom who's got all these 2 million podcasts to pick from and 600 channels? How do you engage that person in this new world?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. So maybe what I'll do is let me talk a little bit about how things are broken down, right? Between traditional things like TV and others, and how the internet as well as content on the internet is consuming that pie, and how that pie is beginning to grow between the different sites. And then we'll go into retail. But I think I definitely want to talk about how retailers can leverage some of these things and learn from how the media giants are already using it. And there's a lot of lessons, and I'll walk through some retail use cases. But let me spend quite a bit of time talking about the media and the current landscape itself. So that'll give you a pretty good background, right? So if you look at like the TV watching, right? Daily basis, I think we spend about 3 hours, right, on TV, watching TV every day. So it used to be a little higher. It used to be like 207 minutes. At one point during the pandemic, it was 213 minutes a day. And then based on Statistica and other analyst sites, it's actually going to go down. Specifically TV. What I mean is like traditional screen, the big screens on your home. But then if you break it down a little bit in terms of overall screen time, that's actually not reducing. That's actually increasing. So we are all adults in America, on average, over 18, are spending about 4 hours and 16 minutes a day watching, consuming content. So that also includes the screen share time of things like YouTube, especially the younger audience watching more content. And I'm sure our listeners are aware that the world population is about 7.9 billion, right? So out of the 7.9 billion, the YouTube audience is about 2.56 billion. So that's a sizable number, right? That's not to ignore. And YouTube's content reach is about 32% of the population, right? Of the internet population, not the world population, but the internet population. Then the ad reach is about 51%. So it's pretty large numbers you're talking about, right? And they've also had especially tremendous growth during the pandemic. And as we are getting out of the pandemic, because the audience is very strong, right? Same thing some sort of applies to every other audiences, like Instagram, 1.48 billion users, right? And then the ad reach is about 18.7%. And they grew, I think, about 85 million users, 6.1%. Right? TikTok is another one that's actually growing fast as well. They had 60 plus million users, 7.3% usage. So you're seeing this audience growth across. And then you're also seeing streaming and music services, right? People are willing to pay for these things because at one point there was a lot of ad-powered content. But now, of course, there is 31% of the people in America pay for a streaming service or a movie service, right? This is not only about just a subscription. It could be about subscription, on demand, one-time purchase, right? Across all those things. So you're seeing like content, people are consuming content, but also paying for it. And there is also a big appetite for this type of thing, right? Which is really interesting to see. The other thing is that as people are spending a lot of time in free content consumption, social media, right? The whole social media advertising spend itself is about 33.1% of the total ad spend, right? Pretty big. So all these things are growing. And another thing that's interesting is because a lot of the stuff that we cover is very commerce oriented, right? So if you look at the worldwide ARPU, right, average revenue per user for e-commerce is about $1,000. Right? In the US, it's about $3,000. So the e-commerce is more advanced in the US. Other than US is, of course, you have some of the Asian countries which have more commerce, like Hong Kong, for instance, right? So that's a big number. And that sort of purchase, the ARPU is broken down across about electronics being the primary category, about $9 billion, $988 billion annual spend, followed by fashion, which is about $900 billion. And then you have other categories going on. Another thing, Jeff, that also somewhat caught my attention is this whole concept of grocery online, right? People purchasing grocery online with any of the services. I think in my previous podcast, I told, right, these days that Sarah and I, only like all of our Safeway shopping is pretty much, order online and pick up in store, right? Now we even started doing that with Walmart as well. So now we basically do either Walmart grocery or Safeway grocery if we need to get grocery, right? Worldwide, I think it's about 28% of the population have at least done it once. Now you look at the United States compared to the world, it's actually the number is slightly low. It's about 23%, 23.7%. But that's actually an increasing percent, right? But the Asian countries have much more deeper online grocery purchases. This is an interesting thing because today, I think even a few weeks ago, we ended up speaking to a couple of startups, Jeff. Remember the delivery companies, right? This is a really exciting area because I think this has a lot of growth potential. And I think pretty much we're going to have, just like we're having Amazon boxes appearing in our house all over the world and even in the US, you're going to have a lot more boxes coming in from not just Amazon, but all kinds of grocery and all kinds of other retailers. Then that same thing also somewhat applies to other industries as well, like travel and everything. But let me first address the retail and then we'll talk a little bit about travel, right? Retail, I think, is interesting because in the retail space, like if I'm a retailer, how do I actually gain the attention, right, of my shoppers, of my consumers? See, I think the most important thing is to look at all your touch points because in the old world, it used to be, what I mean is 10 years ago, 8 years ago, when apps came in, it's all about, I have a website, online site, I have a store, and then I have an app. But the world now is far more complicated because users have multiple touch points. It's just not the store. It's just not the online app. It's just not the website. Even on your mobile device, there are 20 different ways one could interact with you. They could be opening up a Google Maps app and they can communicate with you or with your brand through a Google's business messenger or through Apple's business messenger. They could be doing search on the phone. Your filters appear. They may be in the text. They might be texting their friend, but they may be referring to your brand. Or like they may be doing a shopping, referring to the shopping notion, and then you could appear as a filter, right? An app, a little applet in there, or an app clip. So all these touch points are there. And there is many ways to interact with the user, which means there are more ways the attention is sliced and diced in smaller chunks. But as a brand, you cannot just focus on capturing all the major 3 chunks. You want to be able to capture smaller slices, but many of those smaller slices, which makes it harder for a brand, but also it creates more exposure, more probability that they will actually look at you, which is much, much better. The other thing I also like to focus is, as retailers, you always think about customer journey, right? Let me give you 2 examples on these journeys, right? One of the brands is one of the areas we could look at is essentially in the automobile sector, right? Imagine you are in the automobile sector and you have a brand within your company that provides, oil changes. There's another brand that actually provides car washes. And then there's another one that does repair, and maybe another one that provides paint. So you can look at how the attention gets broken across all these things. The car wash would be a weekly activity. Someone would come every week, every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, once a month, right? But then as you go through the upper spectrum, very seldomly, like once in every 2 years, they may come for a repair, and hopefully they don't come, not a repair, but a paint job, right? Or a collision job. But they may come more frequently for an oil change every 3 months. So you can look at all those things and plot a consumer's path, a journey through you, and how many times do they get to interact, not just with one brand, but across all your brands. So I think this is where like a lot of the understanding of the customer's data is very important, right? Really deeply understanding the customer and breaking down all the sort of the brand barriers and the data segmentation challenges, but really understanding, like creating a full path, the single view of the customer, the full view of the customer. Also understanding, using machine learning, understanding how they're interacting across all your apps. Because one of the challenges that happen within brands is that, and retailers, is that as the demand for digital grew, people just started releasing so many apps. Right? There are so many apps out there, but there is no data that are collected from them, or not enough. Or if the data is coming in, it's not merged with the remaining data. So this whole idea of being able to create that single view, understanding and analyzing, and not just personalizing, but uber personalized, creating contextual personalizing, and also creating a cross-brand, holistic view of a given customer, I think is super important. I can also give a similar example, Jeff, on the beauty industry, right? So if you are a beauty retailer, or if you're a beauty brand, imagine the female consumer from the time she wakes up till the time she goes to bed, all the way on her shopping patterns, the early wake up morning routine, the application of foundations, the application of makeup, the application of mascara, and all those things. From the morning till the time one is going to work, and then online shopping behavior, right? And then ability to create journaling throughout this process, throughout her day. And some parts of the data is automatically captured. The other part is manually entered or captured through various forms of interactions. And then when she walks into your store. So this entire journey, I think, is a part of the attention. So the beautiful thing about retail, I think, is it's unlike the ad folks, because the ad part where the ad providers or advertisers, the ad media, even though they have a large volumes of data, the journey is not clearly stitched because they are not the single brand that is provided, because they are serving the brands as an ad tech or an ad media company. But I think as a retailer, you're serving somebody through that entire customer life cycle, across that entire day in a life, which gives you a better visibility. You want to track that data, right? And you want to create better personalization, better ways to serve this customer, and also to think about methods to increase that attention space.
Curious, Brian, if you have any thoughts on the super apps that we've talked about a little bit in the past in use in China in the East versus the West. And we don't have a super app. I guess I'm going to tee up and see if you think Elon's got a shot at turning Twitter into a super app, like that tweet that we both commented on. So maybe just talk a little bit about super apps in the customer journey. Does that help or hurt in the attention the attention economy, and then maybe speculate a little bit. What do you think Elon might be trying to do with Twitter?
See, I think the super app concept is definitely interesting because just like Elon said, right, these super apps are like extremely popular in Asia. WeChat is one of them. And there are tons of apps that's all using like single purpose. Even in the US, if you think about it, I think a while back there was some data I saw online that was like everyday consumer users looks at only 13 apps. If you're not within the first couple of screen on your iPhone or your Android app, most likely the app gets ignored or eventually deleted. So the idea is to that consumers have, this goes back to the attention, right? Attention is a very scarce commodity, right? Yes, the pie is getting bigger and bigger, but it can only go so much. It's just like saying there are only like, I don't know, X million Bitcoins or X million resources of something. So it's a scarce resource. So I think the question is, how do you actually grab the attention? So I think the idea of a super app is definitely interesting. Super apps have a positive and a negative, right? The positive is that you are maximizing and optimizing the attention of the consumer, right? Because if you look at all the websites, like all these consumer sites, right? And as Jeff, all these consumer attention technology, the study of this, I think, started 20, 30 years ago, I think, through Stanford and other places where they formally taught these kind of concepts in user design and computer human interface designs, all these concept of attention optimization, things like, keeping an eyeball on a site and how do you create things. If you go to like things like Pinterest, you keep on scrolling, the infinite scroll wheel comes in. Those are all methods to create dopamine, right? Because the human mind always predicts what's going to come next. So a lot of these attention capturing eyeball engagement techniques have been converted into scientific instruments, right? Like things like companies like Facebook and companies like Pinterest, TikTok. All these guys have over the years become experts, and their expertise got better and better by instrumentation of understanding the data. So the positive is that you can even further optimize it through super app, because as a consumer, think about it like it's just one app. It's very easy. I click on this, I do this. All my thing is there. I don't have to go through 20 things in my daily. Today, if you look at it, certain apps are very hard, right? I have two separate emails, and then one email, if I had to respond to one email, one app has one method and the other one has another method. Then I go from my email to text message. I got to copy things. It's very painful. It's not very sticky. It's very difficult. Every app optimizes within itself. But if you take the human functions across 2-3 hours of actions, the optimizations are not there. Super apps allows us to even further optimize the experience and provide a better, nicer consumer experience. So I definitely agree with Elon. But for retailers, there is a challenge with super app, right? If you are not in a retail business where you can, like the beauty example I gave you or the automobile example I gave you, those are retail industries that is primed to do super apps because you have 4, 5, 6 things that you can interact with. So you can create increased engagement. But there are also very transactional retail businesses where, you transact with somebody once in a while. So the problem with super apps is that super apps will create gateways, right? What I mean is today, if you look at online, when you search, Google is your gateway, and there is no better search engine than Google, right? Or unless you want to have full privacy, somebody goes to Go, but then you don't get quite great results like what you get in Google. Facebook is your social gateway, right? Depending on who you ask. But then similarly, same thing at home. If you are at home, either you ask your question to Alexa or you ask the same question to Google Home, right? Those are becoming gateways, right? The thing with super apps is these bigger companies would end up creating apps that are highly engaging, and they already have lots of touch points with us. So the super apps will allow bigger companies to create gateways. So there will be more walled gardens and more gateways. So you move from Apple's walled garden into Facebook's walled garden, into Twitter's walled garden, into Venmo's walled garden. So it'll take out some of the retailers out. Today, a lot of retailers have to pay money to all these gatekeepers in order to get a small piece of the attention. So that is a problem, and that's going to happen anyway. And super apps makes the problem even worse. But that's also interesting, and an opportunity for retail brands is that you can try your own super app and you can engage your loyalty consumers. You can engage your consumers in there. And then if certain gateways are not fully established, and the voice gateway in home is not fully established, even though the hardware is established, you can still put your app on Alexa. You can put your app on your home TV, on the Fire TV, or any of these things. So all these chances of these touch points still exist. So I think my encouraging message is, even though there is lots of negatives, the positives, I think, outweigh. And as a retailer or a brand, you want to move sooner into these things and start experimenting with these things.
Do we have an example of a Western retailer that has a super app? I can't think of one.
No, I don't think there is a strict retail example per se, but I think I've spoken to quite a few retail customers who are actually, and prospects who are actually thinking of super app opportunities. So I think it's coming.
So that's pretty intriguing. And I'm guessing you're not going to go any further into any detail on what you just said there.
Yeah.
But I guess what I can say, or I'll ask you, so Elon sent that very interesting tweet out a week ago saying why doesn't the West have a super app? And I think he was clearly implying that if he can successfully conclude Twitter, his acquisition, that maybe he might be thinking of that as a potential super app, tying in a payment mechanism, tying in engagement, all that sort of stuff. So you're actually, I think if I read your thinking there correctly, you think that might be a possibility.
It is a possibility, but I think the question is it a possibility of Twitter is a hard question to answer, right? It goes back to Elon's own questions about bots and all the other things. But I think I'm a big Venmo user, right? Venmo does that to some degree today, right? You can actually pay, I can pay Jeff, and if within my network.
Feel free to, by the way, feel free to pay Jeff all you'd like. Right now, I just have money going out. I don't have it coming in as much.
I know. Yeah, but if I put that if I make my conversation public, I could see that. And I can sort by certain categories, like all the yoga conversations or whatever, right?
Interesting.
For house cleaning or whatever, right? So you can look by topic and so on. I mean, like people like when some of these payment players, I think, are also in a good chance to play there. But I think a lot of players will get into it. You will have payment-only social media companies going at it. Then the strict content companies, right, like Twitter and others from content perspective, going into payment and enabling payment in it. I'm sure if like Twitter starts it, they can get a lot of volume because they already have a pretty big user base. So the possibilities are definitely there. And I think what's interesting that Twitter has compared to a YouTube or something else is that Twitter is always considered as a short interaction, right? Payment transaction is a short interaction, even though shopping builds over time. The actual payment process is always a short interaction. So I think it's very much in line with that thinking.
It'll be fun to watch how that plays out. Brian, what happens in a recessionary scenario that we either are in or a bunch of us think we are getting very close to in an attention economy scenario?
I think that's an interesting question, Jeff. I think as recessions are hard to predict, and when will you come out of recession is also hard to predict. But definitely we are already, from the financial side, a lot of value has been lost, especially in the last month of May and April. And I think it started in like late 2021, and you're seeing these things. I think in the financial markets, as you asked very well, stocks are getting a hit. Even though stocks being a leading indicator, it's really good to see. And there are adjustments happening there. But then that will also come into the private market with startup funding and companies doing layoffs and everything. The attention economy is interesting. But before I go there, I also want to talk about on the consumer side of things, because American consumers are spending today, right? If you look at like just the airline industry alone, because we have been locked at home for, a year and a half or two, locked, and now everybody wants to go out. If you look at the whole package vacation, there was like $41.65 billion, right? I think increase actually $102 billion in package vacation this year alone, year over year increase, 59% increase. That just speaks to the volume of spending. And it also goes back to the nature that people were locked in at home during the pandemic period. And then you are seeing consumer spend, even with inflation, even with this high CPIs and all, you are still seeing people spending. And I think that's also a sort of a post-pandemic influence. But I think what will happen is it will take 1 or 2 quarters till this thing is squeezed out. I think we will have a very well-spent summer in terms of more and more people traveling and spending more and doing vacations and all that stuff. And then as they come back, I think things will slow down. And I think along with the stock market getting hit, you will also probably see a consumer credit squeeze and other things as well, because those are just natural things to follow. Now let's going back to so that's just the financial side of how the spending and the different touch points. But now if you go back to the attention economy started a recession 2 quarters ago, maybe in January, as people are getting out of the pandemic, as some of these folks like Netflix and others and even Zoom Netflix lost subscribers. And then the eyeballs are slowly slowing down. The war in Ukraine is moving attention out. And especially as we are approaching summer, more and more people are going to travel, which is actually going to take away a little bit of the online usage and some of the attention. But those are things that will return back again. But I think it's really interesting to see when you take the consumer spending squeeze that might come 2 quarters from now and the attention economy recession. But I think attention economy will always grow in grand scheme of things. In short terms, like I said, within a short time window, you may have an up and a down, ebbs and flows. But I think over time, it'll still increase because attention is a very scarce commodity, right? Whether you are using it online, whether you're using it in traditional media, whether you're using it doing physical shopping in stores, it's a scarce commodity. People have only so much time in a given day. So I think definitely brands have to compete, retailers have to compete, the big companies have to compete, and the science have to be mastered more and more every day.
So in wrapping it up, what should a retailer be doing as we begin to think about the impacts of an attention economy, and as we all, as consumers, begin to understand the value of our time and where we give our time and where we give our attention? What should a retailer do?
I think for retailers and even brands, I think this has always been a big priority, even though they don't specifically call it an attention economy. This is somewhere in marketing slides all the time. They call it generating traffic and leads, and 63% of marketers, that's their biggest challenge. That's their biggest priority, right? This is true across all retail and brands. But the thing what's really interesting is I think I would focus on a couple of things. First, I think I would focus on all my consumer touch, which most brands and retailers know, but also not only today, touch points that is available today, but what are all the possible touch points, right? My customer journey, which most retailers know their journey very well, but also understanding it from an instrumented fashion. It's what is the empirical qualitative side versus what is the measured quantitative side. Do they go together? And I think the third part that's really important is understanding and getting a holistic view of your data. Do I have a holistic view of the data today, right? Do I have a holistic view across brands? Do I have a holistic cross-promotion strategy? Do I know my consumer across brands, across all the silos I have in my company? That's a very important one. And then once those three things, I think the thing to focus on is like, what are the avenues of my being present today, right? Because today it's not just having a mobile app, right? Because if you're not a well-known retailer, people may not even use your mobile app, and very seldomly. So you want to be able to, even in the whole aspect of mobile, you want to be able to be a filter. You want to be able to be in business messenger. We want to be able to be in search, app clips. There are so many like avenues within just one device, right? That actually applies everywhere. That's similar math could apply in store. There are so many touch points in store. Similar things apply online. So I think you want to think hard about what are all the touch points very carefully, and how do I leverage those touch points? Things like super apps, things like providing capabilities in all these touch points. The other thing is also understand, once you have data on your consumer, apply AI, unleash the power of machine learning, right? Understand your consumer more deeply. Be able to do in a deeper contextual personalization ability to know your consumer at an n equals 1 level, right? Not the traditional old school segmentation. Your consumer individually. But then not only just that, but also contextually. What Jeff wanted 2 hours ago is very different from what he wants right now. He wants me to transfer Venmo him money. I'm just joking. But the idea is that people's attention and requirements change by the minute. But understanding that when they're interacting with your brand, I think is critical. So that's why I think you want to look at AI as that force within your company.
Brian, we used to talk about the customer journey almost as like an interesting idea or a concept. But as a retailer tries to navigate through the attention economy and trying to battle us consumers getting off that journey and being distracted, that becomes much more of a mission critical strategy going forward.
Absolutely. Fully agree.
Yeah. Good place to put a pin in it. Until we talk again, Brian, always interesting stuff.
Likewise, Jeff, it's a pleasure talking to you. And I'm sure we talk about very interesting stuff. Hopefully our listeners find the same thing as well. And hopefully they've gathered some little ideas that they can implement within their companies.
Sounds good. for tuning into today's episode. For more info, refer to the pod notes below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us grow. I'm your host, Jeff Roster, analyst at large. If you want to connect, follow us on Twitter at JeffPR or at BrianSathianathan, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Visit my website at roster.retail.com or Brian's at iterate.ai. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.